Hey everybody, Brian Harpson here with Viz Audio Designs. Got a little tutorial put together on how to use Sibelius in conjunction with routing MIDI out to MainStage. So we'll essentially be combining plugins, in my case, Contact, and sometimes the Sibelius player with routing MIDI out for all the electronics and samplers and whatnot to MainStage. So the idea here is that we'll be configuring the IAC driver over here to route MIDI out to the MainStage in. So let's dive right in here. I've already got the audio MIDI setup window open. If you just pull it up, sometimes it'll open into the audio setup, in which case you'll just need to come up here to Window and choose Show MIDI Studio. Mine is obviously hide because I've already got the MIDI Studio pulled up. And then you'll double click on IAC driver, which will bring this window up. And right now all I've got is this guy right here, the IAC driver bus 1. I'll need to add a few more because I'm wanting to use, in my case, I'll just be using one synth and a sampler, but perhaps you want more. I never find myself needing more than 3 synths and a sampler, so I'm just going to go ahead and add 4. 1, 2, 3. I'm just clicking here on my trackpad. All right, so the numbers don't line up with what I'm going to change them to, but now I'll just come up here to, I'll double tap on them, call that one synth 1, synth 2, oops, synth 3. And what I'm essentially doing here is configuring what's essentially a virtual MIDI cable. This is built in to Mac OS. It's the IAC driver. On Windows machines, there's other things you can configure, but fortunately these are already pre-configured and pre-installed anyways, on a Mac machine. So I just kind of remember these. We've got synth 1, synth 2, synth 3, synth 4. These don't have to be named that. I just choose those for semantic reasons. That's the reason I picked them. So we're done with that side. Now if I started Sibelius without the loaded up, this bus 1 would be the only one that's available. It would come up as IAC driver bus 1. So now that I've got these all configured, I'm just going to minimize this. I got a really simple file loaded that I set up here specifically for this tutorial. It's just some really simple battery writing, a little bit of for an ensemble. It's more or less like a warm-up, I mean, let's be honest, and nothing really too impressive. It's just kind of a proof of concept sort of thing. So I'll come up here to the Play tab. I come up here to the Setup, and this is where we'll get everything set up to route everything properly. Now, when I wrote this, I just set up a very basic playback configuration that just has a few Contact instances here. So all my VDL sounds can load in. I'm actually going to go ahead and rewind this here, press spacebar to let it play. Alright, so you can hear I've got my snares and tenors, and you could hear those if you wanted to, vibes. And right now the synthesizer is just a piano sound, because everything right now is just loaded in the Contact instances, and it's being pulled from the virtual drumline library, since that's what I have set as my sound set. So I'll need to come in here, playback configuration, and I'll add in my synth 1, synth 2. I'm just double tapping here, get those loaded up. All right, there's one more step that we have to do here before this is all configured as needed. And you might have noticed, if you're paying close attention, this little asterisk popped up, meaning that we changed the playback configuration. We'll give it a new name here in a little bit. Now we'll come in here to manual sound sets. We'll want to set all of these synths to manual sound set, because this is essentially going to allow us to route the MIDI data as we want, configure things manually, whereas if we didn't do this, we wouldn't be able to configure things in the mixer as needed. So I've got that set. All right. And there we go. Got that set up. Come in here to synth 2, same thing. 16 channels. Synth 3. And synth 4. Use manual sound set. All right, and we'll go ahead and give this a new name. Actually, I'll just rename this one. All right. I might have already created one with a similar name, so it might tell me I need to rename it something else. Oh, all right, cool. Here we go. All right, so we've got our VDL with 6 instances of Contact 5, our 4 synth instances, and we'll hit save. Now I'll hit close, and I'll rewind again. I'm just using my command left bracket to rewind there, and now spacebar. So you'll probably notice, or once I click on it, you'll notice I'm clicking on these and it's not making any sound because, whoops, got stuck on there for a second. Let's undo that. All right, that's because those, by default, those will now be routed to those new synth staves. At least this one will anyways. Let's come back in here to setup to make sure everything is still set as needed. All right. Synth 2, 16 channels, etc., etc. All right, so the next step will be to press M on the keyboard here, or if you wanted to, you can come up here and press the mixer button. And that'll get it to where we can actually start configuring things to the proper channels. So by default, since I had everything in the manual sound sets now set to manual playback devices or manual sound sets, I can set these to whatever channels I want. I'll generally set these to 1 and 2. I always have less issues with things routing properly. You can see here I'm on the synth 1. And if I hover over that, I'm on IAC driver synth 1. This one's also, that's the synthesizer B staff, also on synthesizer IAC bus synth 1. And that's by default going to be on channel 2, assuming you set up things properly on the manual sound set. So now I want to come over here and, well, it looks like it by default. This one's set to IAC synth 2. This is something you'll want to check. For instance, let's say you have maybe a synth 1, another a synth 2, synth 3, etc., etc. You want to make sure you actually pick the proper IAC synth bus. Since I only have 2, it looks like it went ahead and configured those properly for me without me even having to do anything. There we go. Okay. Now we're set on channel 1, channel 2. I believe I just hit that down arrow there. All right. Looks like everything's configured the way it should be now. Sweet. Okay. So as I mentioned before, now that that's all set up, I'll rewind and hit play. These aren't making any sound because they're routing out to nothing at the moment. There's nothing actually receiving. These are going out of the IAC synth 1. Those are also on the IAC synth 2. I just don't have anything loaded at the moment. Like even if I selected that, I'm going to press my MIDI keyboard here. See, no sound. All right, cool. All right, so the next step is going to be pulling up MainStage. So now MainStage is going to load. I'm just going to use the 2 keyboards concert here. That'll be enough for my means. If you want to actually configure for more, you can dig into MainStage a little more on your own and kind of get things set up to sort of work as needed. All right, let's fill that up to the screen. Okay, so right now we've got 2 keyboards and they're configured to electric piano and analog pad. And by default, MainStage kind of does things from a bottom-up sort of approach. I personally, and maybe this is just how my own brain works, I like to see things from the top down. So I like to think of this as the synth 1 and this as the synth 2. So what I'm first going to do is go ahead and get rid of this channel strip and clear that out. Reset channel strip. And I'm just going to set this as an empty sampler instrument. So I'll come down here to my EXS24 sampler, pick stereo, and that'll pop up. First thing I want to do here, just for simplicity's sake, is drag that up so that way no matter how hard people push the keys, they will all trigger at the loudest volume. And then you can go within here and adjust things on a volume by volume basis, but we're not going to worry about that right now. All right, so that's set up. Now, to get things routing properly, first what we'll do is come over here to the layout mode, and I'll pick my top keyboard. You can see right now it's set to all. If I come over here back to Sibelius and choose this, whoop, forgot I have to go back to edit mode first. All right. And press some keys. Alright, so right now everything is going to all different keyboards. You can see right there between those two. Nothing's actually being routed via the IAC bus. Everything, all MIDI data, whether it's from a MIDI controller or whatever, is all being routed onto these keyboards. So to get it to where it's just on a driver by driver basis, so just this MIDI data, these notes get routed to this, get routed from this to that keyboard, and this to that. I come back over here to layout mode. I'll select my top keyboard. Here on MIDI port, I'll choose IAC driver 1. And then this one, for my purposes of this tutorial anyhow, IAC driver 2. Now I'll come back over to edit. And if I select this, you can hear me hitting the keyboard. Switch back over to MainStage. You can see that it's just triggering on that keyboard. Now I'll select this one to get prepped for loading in some samples on this bottom staff. Oh, well, I guess I do still have some a sound loaded in there. Need to actually get that configured to my own sounds. All right, so now that that's routing properly, I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to pull in a few samples. I've just got a sweet little boom sample that I'm going to put right there on C1, which is the bottom key of my 49 key MIDI controller. And that's another thing that if you really wanted to, let's come back out to layout mode. If you wanted to set this to be whatever the size of your MIDI controller is, you could change this. Mine is 49. So you'll be able to see if I come over here back to Sibelius, choose synthesizer, press the bottom key. It's not actually the bottom key up here. If I had a 79 key or 76 key MIDI controller, it would be all the way down there. But I'm pressing the bottom key and I'm at 49. So that's something you can really configure in terms of the look of it, if you're really that picky about it. But I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. That's a little more in-depth MainStage stuff. So anyhow, you can see that I've got these two loaded now. So whenever I come back over to Sibelius, I'll select the sampler staff, and then I'll come back over here, and once I press this bottom key, you can see I'm getting that sample. I'll press the next key up where they drop the other one. So we got a nice little sample action going on there, a little swell action. Something else I'll always do whenever I drag samples in here, I'll uncheck, whoops, didn't want to do that. Unless I know there's the possibility I might want to transpose them, I'll select them and uncheck the pitch boxes there. So that way, if you have to move them between keys, like if I have to drag this up here, let's say I'll just move it up to this F and press that. It's not actually going to change the pitch. Right, whereas if I left that checked and move it way up here, see, I'll move it up to this other C. You can hear the difference. See, much higher in pitch, and it also changes the actual speed of the sample. So just something to keep in mind as you're working in this sampler environment. Okay, anyhow, so I'm going to close that. Let's go ahead and save this as something. I'll just call this Sibelius 2 MainStage samples. All right. Cool. So that's kind of the first step here. We've got things routing properly. If I was to select these, actually, let's go ahead and add these in. This is going to be for this first bar. There's my boom. And here's my swell. All right. So let's see how these sounds. Got my little boom. All right, so you could kind of, ish sort of hear that. So now let's say that maybe we want to change patches here. Over here in MainStage, if I select my my initial patch here, you can see right here under Program Change, set as 1. What I generally like to do, oops, didn't want to double click that. I'll just copy essentially the last patch, or if there's another patch I wanted to copy, I'll just copy it and then paste. So that way, I haven't changed the name on it because I should have done that first. Let's actually go back. Delete that. Come down here. I'm going to rename this sampler. So now whenever I copy this, I'll say edit or edit copy, paste. The sampler staff or sampler channel strip always copies over, and it'll always be the same instrument. So whether I go between this one or this one, this is the new one, you can see up here that the Sibelius to MainStage samples always transfers over. So you don't have to worry about which sampler instrument is actually on which one. So we've got electric piano and synth. That's actually kind of a misnomer. Synth samples. We're going to make this one piano / bass and samples. You can obviously name these whatever you want. So synth, the soft analog pad, let's call this one, or choose a piano here. Instrument, synth 1, create. And for this one, let's just choose, I like the thumb bass for it's a nice articulate bass sound. I'm not sure I'm wanting that to be the range on those, so I'll come here to layer editor. I believe this A up here. Let's see. Yeah, that was that A right there. All right, and then I want the bass to be everything below that. That's one of the things I just love about MainStage. It's the ability to easily adjust layers and everything. I mean, it's all visual, all very cool. All right. So let's come over here to Sibelius. Now the way, actually, before we even do that, we'll come back over here to MainStage. So we have two different patches, right? Asking, okay, well, how do you do the patch changes? You'll notice down here, under Program Change, it says Duplicate. And that's because I copied these two. They're both set as 1. So once I set this second one up here as 2, duplicate will go away. So you can, if you just keep an eye down there on Program Change, you'll see this one is 1, that one's 2. 1, 2. All right, so I'll come back over here to Sibelius. I'll just add some technique text. Now to add a program change, you'll want to say tilde, lowercase p, and then whichever program it is you're wanting to trigger. This one will be P1. This one will be P2. Now I'm going to play this back here, and you'll notice something a little bit odd about the change. We should have synth here, piano, and bass there. So I'm just going to play it, let you hear how it sounds. All right, so you hear there how I didn't actually change in the first note. That's just because there's a little bit of lag over here in MainStage of when the patches change. It's not quite as instant, at least when you're working in this environment. Yes, in a live situation, if you were able to click between them or use this patch change button, it's instant. I mean, it happens very, very quickly. But when we're in the situation we're in, for whatever reason, there's just a little bit of lag. So what I'll usually do is pick the patch change I'm working with and just move it a little bit back. All right, so I'll let you see it here. Up, and another little quirk of MainStage and Sibelius. Notice there that it didn't actually change back to 1. It always takes a little bit of, same sort of deal there. There's a little bit of lag. So you can either let's go ahead and play this. Whoops. Play this. So you can see there that it's on 2. You can either play it back once and then start it again, and then it'll be back on 1, especially if you're from the top of whatever you're working on. Or you can just come over here to MainStage and just select the first patch, and then it'll work properly. All right, so we'll just play this on its own. Sweet. And something else you'll notice is that the sound usually cuts off at the end. Unlike sampled instruments that are loaded as plugins, like if I was to play this on its own, you'll notice that that cymbal line decay kind of went out even after the end of it. Whereas with this one, if I play it, you'll notice there's kind of a little bit of clip at the end of the sound. And that's just because once the MIDI data is done being sent, it essentially cuts it off over here in MainStage. One remedy for that is to just put a little, like an extremely long, 10 beats a minute. Good luck marching that. Putting that in there, and then once you play it, it'll let it naturally decay. So I'll just come back here. If I played it there from the last measure, it'll take forever to start. And there you go. So a nice little natural decay. All right, so that's more or less it. I mean, there's probably a few more details we could cover, but I think that's kind of the gist of it. If you've got any questions, feel free to shoot me an email via our contact form on the Visaudio website on the contact page. But thanks for watching. Hope you packed a lunch through this because it was a pretty long video, but thanks for watching. See you next time.